My name is Steph. I'm the manager here. We're so pleased to have two poets with us tonight, Matt Miller and Cindy Veach. They each have a new collection of poetry out now. I'm going to introduce them both right now, and then we'll have Cindy read, and then Matt. Matt Miller is the author of The Wounded for the Water, as well as two other collections of poetry. His poetry has been widely published, and he has won prizes and fellowships, including the Trifecta Poetry Prize and the Wallace Stegner Fellowship. He teaches English and coaches football at Phillips Exeter. Cindy Veach is the author of Gloved Against Blood, a collection of poetry set against the backdrop of the textile mills of 19th century Lowell. She has an MFA from the University of Oregon and has published widely. So please join me in welcoming Cindy Veach.
Well, thank you all for coming. So excited to be here. I've never been to Exeter. What a great little town. Should have come up earlier and gone shopping. So I just want to thank Water Street Books and Dan, who I haven't met, for inviting me to read here tonight. And I'm really honored to read with Matt. I've been a fan of his work for a long time, since I bought his first book way back when it first came out. So this will be a fun night. So I'm going to read from my book, mostly, and then I might read a couple of newer poems. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. So just as background, this book is, this collection explores inherited histories against the backdrop of the patriarchal textile mills of Lowell, Massachusetts. My great-grandmother emigrated from Quebec to work in the mills when she was a young woman. And just sort of as an aside, my family moved a lot, about every 2 or 3 years when I was growing up. And when people asked me, "Where are you from?" I didn't even like being asked that, because I had never had an answer. And then as an adult, when I moved to New England, my mother was sharing stories with me about this and my great-grandmother. And I felt for the first time like I kind of had a hometown, even though I never lived in Lowell, but I had roots somewhere at least. And that's my research into all that is what inspired this book. So, Great Red Wall. This is the Merrimack, the Charles, the Concord, and this, the red brick of mills, the home of warp and weft that lured them from their failing farms to toil cotton into cloth 13 hours a day. And this red brick on brick on brick is all that's left of sweat and linty lungs. Can you see them years later in these offices, these cubicles, these cute boutiques with clothes made in Bangladesh, or sitting in the hip cafes that sell espresso 15 ways? Here is where they spent their days, where factory bells rang come and done. Several of the poems in the collection are persona poems, and they speak in the voice of the Mill Girls. And I was inspired by the Lowell Offering, which was a literary journal that was for the Mill Girls to publish their stories in. My paper keeps sliding on me. How it resists. And sometimes it's too much, these aisles of crowded looms, their stanchions of white thread, spooling like udders, my needy shuttles of flowering dogwood, for its hardness, for how it resists splintering, for the way it loves to be polished smooth. Some days the floor slants, the room seems cockeyed, light muddles, too slim for eyes to see the eye, and the whole mill howls as if cotton were milk, the way two mirrors held just right create an infinity of I. One of the questions I puzzled over as I worked on this was why my grandmother chose to leave her country, and that was sort of a brave thing to me to make that decision, to leave your home. So the next two poems sort of are, one is sort of me asking her questions, and then the other is her sort of speaking to me. And they're not necessarily in concert with one another, but drawn. The light so small when you woke to say goodbye to your country, to walk years in darkness, to and from the factory, texture a life from millwork, Tell me, what brought you to place your foot on the treadle, to thrum and thrum until poverty was a phantom? And what are the visions you threaded your shuttle with? Please speak to the warp and the weft, that which is thrown across, that which is drawn through. This next poem uses some lines from one of the stories in the Lowell Offering. It was called A Weaver's Reverie. And there's a reference in it to sending money home to make a gentleman of her brother. So a lot of the mill girls, their earnings would go back home to pay for the education of their brothers. It's called Theft. How I came down from Quebec to work in the mills. How I never imagined it would be such hell. How industry, how factory bell. How many miles of cloth I conjured from the bloody cotton. How my eyes couldn't get enough of the one window, the great out there. How I lied about a cloudless sky. There was one solitary cloud far up in the cerulean vault. How I schemed to leave, steal my wages instead of sending them back home to make a gentleman of my brother. My heart fluttered like a prisoned bird with painful longings for an unchecked flight. How your grandmother, mother, you, how your daughter, because I came here, because I did not flee. So the livelihood of the mills depended not just on the labor of the mill girls, but it also depended on the labor of enslaved African Americans in the South. And the mill girls, many of them were abolitionists, including the poet Lucy Larcom. And this next poem incorporates some lines from one of her poems, and it addresses Frances Cabot Lowell, who was the founder of the first textile mill that incorporated a new process where they could take cotton and turn it into cloth under one roof. So by doing that, increased the demand for cotton. All right, so it's Dear Frances Cabot Lowell, how is it you don't see all down the row, blood bobbins, all down the row? I've heard fields of white bowls, each puff turned up to the sun, are beautiful by the row. But at what price this accursed fiber that threads your looms all in a row? Every day I feel that I am sinning against the light to stay still in a row. Turn those fields 10,000 times, the blood of souls in bondage will thicken by the row. Frances, you are the sin, not these cloven white perennials planted in a row. They bleed, I weave, they bleed. Why can't you see blood threads your looms all down the row? Throughout history, sewing and needlework has been, for women, a form of communication and expression. And this is something that the mill girls would do in the evening after their shifts were over. They'd gather in their common room and mend or needlework. And it's also something that's been passed down in my family. And for me, there's always been an interesting sort of juxtaposition between the precision of needlework and the fact that it does inevitably unravel over time. So there's several poems in the collection that are related to sewing. So I will read a couple of those. So I had a request for a poem that someone here likes that I have never read before. It's a triptych, so it's 3 parts, so I'll try it out. They're short, so don't. They're short, 3 short parts. And my French is terrible. My mother would not like me to say that, but triptych, travail d'aiguille, which means needlework. And there's an epigraph from Jory Graham. A spot where a story now gone has ridden, the yarn spinning free. 1. Nanny. She could handle the finest yarn. When it tried to fly away, she made it stay, wrapped it tight around 2 fingers, pulled it over, under, knit, purl, her needles clicked. If she dropped a stitch, she'd pick it up, quick. If she found a mistake, she'd rip the piece all the way back and start over. Evenings were for needlework. Passing the time, she'd say. Busy work, my father said. She left school in 8th grade, the oldest girl. She had to care for baby Ruth. 2. Penelope. Pen, the Greek noun for thread. Nowhere in the literature is the shroud described. Size, variegation, gauge, thread, silk, linen, cotton. Only the deed itself. Penelope, weaving by day, unweaving by night. Modern psychology has named this perpetual activity without progress, a condition agnostic of gender. But she was not a sufferer, this weaver of strategies, and this to avoid capture, to thwart. She claimed the distaff and the shuttle. 3. Meme. I've seen the steps she climbed each morning to begin another day in the mill. They spiral like a beaded periwinkle toward a far-off rectangle of light. 3 years she threw the shuttle through the web of cotton threads before she stopped for him. And then the 13 births. The lost one's name was Rose. He shuttled between women. The close work kept her calm. She bore the thimble well and climbed the steps each morning. Okay, and one more sort of sewing poem. French seams. That's a type of seam that is sort of a seam within a seam, so there are no raw edges. And there's an epigraph from Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. The little useless seam, the idle patch, this pretty feudal seam. From Nanny Parkerow, I learned to sew French seams. Seams that hide raw edges within the seam itself. Seams that won't unravel, that are neat, even on the wrong side. Finished, she'd say. Seams that take planning, accurate estimating, extra fabric. Each one folded over twice. Making allowances, she called it. Hers were meticulous, unrivaled. They could be counted on to hold. They never ripped or frayed. Still, the marriage unraveled early. She had to stitch shoes at McElwain's in Nashua and raise a latchkey kid. When Social Security could not sustain her, she came to live with us. Garter-stitched dish rags, all she could manage when senility set in. From Nanny Parkerow, I learned to hide raw edges within the seam itself. Each one folded over twice. Making allowances, she called it. Even on the wrong side, I would not rip or fray. I would be counted on to hold. I would be neat, meticulous, unrivaled. It would take planning, accurate estimating, extra fabric. Still, the marriage raveled. I had to stitch and stitch, fold and fold and fold. All that extra yardage, I could not salvage us. Finished, she'd say. Just read 2 more from the book, and then I'll read 2 new poems, if that works. So like most writers, I'm guilty of having some obsessions that I tend to write about over and over again. So those include sort of loss of faith in things like relationships and God and companies. Stacey. And also in the inevitable loss of details. So how a whole entire life can come down to a sentence like my great-grandmother worked in the mills or my grandfather abandoned his family. So the next couple of poems I'll read will sort of be along those obsessions. Okay, The Other Woman. Okay, where are you? Here we go. The Other Woman. My grandfather did not come back. Instead, he sent his girlfriend knocking on the door to ask, please, grant him a divorce. My mother, age 2, peekabooed with this visitor in camel hair coat with painted nails. and my young grandmother in her thin house dress, a pocket full of rosary beads, gold-plated crucifix tapped on her collarbone like a metronome. For she believed, read her Mary Knowles, went to daily mass, confessed to the gauzy man-shadow, who at the end mimed his blessing, making of his hand a steeple that knifed the air. She breathed as he pronounced her penance, which could erase every black mark but one. No, not for any number of our fathers. This she knew and never questioned, even at the moment the softly made-up other woman stood before her, both feet firmly planted on the threshold, mouthing, please. And field trip, this was inspired by a trip my daughter took with her school up to the boot cotton mills. So field trip, boot cotton mills. Is it too much to hope for a strand of you? It's possible. I was born imprinted, beginning with loom from the old word jalom, stitched beside my fate line, so I may salvage our history, what you wished for, why you came. I wish to open my hand and find you, my daughter's age, running 3 or 4 looms, deaf to the clatter, heddles and shuttles, ringing ears, 13 hours a day. I tell her, your great-great-grandmother emigrated from Canada to work in these mills. After she comes home from school with a swatch of cloth she wove, as I finger its flawed lines, I must teach her how, as we pass through the eye of our coming and going, that you may lead us to the fell, the point where the warp and weft become cloth. Okay, so we're leaving the mills now.
We never really leave the mills.
We never really leave the mills, no. But
So, 2 more recent poems that I'll read to end with. Of deer, a lion, rhinos, and the empty nest. On the drive to State College, I see 2 deer, 2 miles apart, curled up over their guts. In these parts, no one gives them a second glance, but the dentist who lured Cecil from the sanctuary and shot him is trending. Not to mention the latest about rhinos. Subject line, only 3 northern white rhinos left on the planet. My darling deer just don't rate. There are too many, amuck in yards, nibbling gardens. Those tender tips of new growth too hard to resist. Let me go on record. I'm committed to saving my children's things. Baby sweaters, drawings, report cards. Magnets they made for school fundraisers still adorn my fridge. Poachers get rich off parts, horns, blood, bones. People will pay anything for a cure-all. Who doesn't love a potion? Who isn't fascinated by magic? The coin pulled from an ear, and there is no end to the awe of a good miracle. The blind man who seeth. The email says, in vitro and viable surrogates are the northern white rhino's last hope. Please donate. I'm still thinking about 2 deer, the nap of their fur. I drove by too fast. I'd give anything to have those years back.
okay, and then, so I don't know if any of you remember
A few years ago, a couple years ago, there was a discovery of this new species of octopus. And he's white, and I think they were calling him the ghost or Casper or something. So he inspired this poem, actually, or she, I don't know. But anyway, it's kind of cute. It's called In Search Of. It's all over the news. Scientists have discovered an incerat, or unfinned octopod, also described as an undescribed species, while searching the floor of the Pacific Ocean off the Hawaiian Islands near Necker Island. All its suckers in 1 row on each arm, a non-muscular, pale white, billowy body with black eyes, a creature never seen before, the deepest dwelling octopod ever found, a surprise while plumbing the depths. I've been scared to death my whole life. The kid who crept into her parents' bedroom, convinced her hysterical heart was galloping toward the finish line. I'm fluent in fear. Be safe is my mantra. It's as if there's a flashing red light on my head, the siren who saves ships from the rocks. I'm a total failure at risk, like the time I went 5 miles over and a cop came out of nowhere, license and registration. Or when I tried to rebel as a teen and OD'd on blue meanies. And how was I supposed to know that my palpitations after a man at Safeway seized was a panic attack? Can you blame me for dropping my groceries and running all the way home? For becoming instantly agoraphobic? Hello, death at my door. It's been a lifetime of crossing on walk, annual checkups, sensible shoes, swimming only in pools, killing all the spiders. This is why I stayed married and stayed married. 30 years of eggshells and gaslighting, and now, because of this weird thing discovered by brave scientists at the bottom of the sea, I'm getting up my gumption. What else is there to do at this point? My air is running out. I've been waiting for my heart to quit long enough. What the hell? It's settled. Let the panic rush in. Let it course through me. I'm going down there alone. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for coming out. I think I sent a Facebook post earlier saying what a great night for poetry, but it's a terrible night for poetry. It's so nice out. There's a band playing around the corner. So thanks for coming. It's that's asking a lot to people to show up for this stuff. Thank you, Water Free Bookstore, as ever, for always hosting us writers and doing stuff. Cindy for coming up and reading with me. Last summer I was really working on these poems about Lowell, and I had this I gotta do this book about women working in the mills and and the language warp and weft, and I was like, I had it. I'm like, I know what I'm gonna do, and then Cindy's book came out. I'm like, but I loved it at the same time, and it pushed me to go a little in a different direction. Oh, this is nice. It comes out. But I love the book, and I was like, okay, all right, I have to do something a little different here. But I drew a lot from it. I learned a lot from it. Stole a lot of ideas. And that's what artists do. Is that Picasso? No, it was Da Vinci. Da Vinci said, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." I think that was.
Have at it.
But I do have some. We both have Lowell connections. I have some Lowell folk back here, so I'm going to read a couple of Lowell poems. This one poem starts off. It's a newer poem. It's not in the book. It's work on the next book. It's sort of like. It might be the first poem in the next book that really focuses on the Merrimack River and the valley and the towns around that valley. And we're connected to that. The same indigenous tribes that were fishing along the Pawtucket Falls were up here, Passaconaway and the Pennacooks were up here, in Exeter too. So it's really about rivers. So first one is sort of imagine a guy just trying to find the river as his muse, his source, trying to use the river as a source and trying to go back to that river of his home and calling onto it. It's a sort of an invocation. Invocation at the Merrimack River. And now I take a tongue into your mud, into your syringe and soda bottle banks, to beg your braided silk, your Pennacook equay, your sliding tar of snake, your mouth of stones, your clavicle of royal and moan, your lover ghost thrown from Pawtucket Falls, your whitewater of bread and roses, your creek of locks and lifts, your leap from burning windows, your fished out crib of salmon and shiv, of shell casings and shad, alewife and boosted tires. Your cradle of flywheel, of factory, your milk girl offering, your doffers, your biddies, your boom and your busted. Pennant palmed I stand in this, your sun tussling dawn to call a song. My river, roll your blue-black big hips under the oxidized iron of cantilever and cable, deluge and slip bridge ribs and sing between the red brick and brackish heft of textile mills turned art galleries with crack alleys. You, bender of flashboard pins, come, sing to me, sluice me, double back and seduce me to your flood, tenor me down to your Irish blood canals, your Greek restaurant ghettos, fluorescent Cambodian groceries, chunk-heeled Brazilian bakeries. Your cobblestones exposed to sell some roomy history. Bones old and broken of flesh, in sack and ash I call a song. You ferried me home, now drink me and spit me out where City Hall is crouched inside downtown's diverticula. Down to the fountain at JFK Plaza where my brother was suckered by a kid I wouldn't hit back. And there, just one of 10 police stations, Pollard Library, and across Arcand Ave, Lowell High, its field house named after our grandfather, the calmed Masonic temple, the bring your own wine via tie, and bars and bars and bars, one for every St. Anne's, Immaculate, and St. Patrick's. In your hydraulic drop, prayers are tossed like toast of tilted pints. There, here, my palms unfold. Give willow to me against my flooded nights, against my broken rights, so you flow down and roll stones, old river, and moor me here for what I am and not. Wake my song and pluck me into your pulse. I'll stay down in your valley, drink your ink of water and dream myself back into you. Make me small again, roll me in your lap, your mud, your moon-lit blood, supplicated by the greasy vents of a train car diner. I beg your lip of water to whisper. So that's something that's working on. All right. So my brother's here, John, and John does write poetry. He's a great source of poems. So I have a couple newer poems that I wanted to share. He's never heard them before. We grew up together real close. We were only about 13 months apart, and so we were always playing together, fighting together, the Irish twin style. So we have a lot of experiences together. In this particular experience, one winter, we would take our skateboards, and we'd take the trucks off, where the wheels go on, and we'd put straps on the top, we'd turn them around and make them into snowboards. One day we were about to do that, before we had to buy a snowboard, before snowboards, and then go down to golf club hills, and stuff like that. But one day, when you do something as a kid, you think it's going to be funny, but it turns out to be really mean? That's what happens in this poem. Nobody ever did that? Yes. So this is called Winter Break. Sorry, John. Oh, you come off all right, man. I come off like a dink. Winter Break. The season we unscrewed the trucks from decks, rubbed crayon on their bottoms as wax, and nailed the scavenged loops of purple nylon belts into plywood for bindings, chopping skateboards into snowboards to bomb the golf course hills the next town over. The day my brother and I waited out back of our house with Dave and Justin for Mom to drive us all too lazy to walk. The second I saw my brother's board between his feet as I tightened my boots. The hours of my mother, sick of us at home all break and listening to us grouse, there's nothing for us to do, we're bored. That moment it took for me to grab the board, set on its side between my brother's feet as I rose from laces to ram it hard into his balls. Sorry. The forever for him to fall, howling into the snow as I realized I'd hurt him more than the laughing mad I'd hoped to have. How quick as shit, Jean was back on his feet, the board in his fist so fast I never saw it smash the skull above my smile. The minute maybe until my head stopped spinning, cheekbone raw bloody, until Mom detonated from the kitchen, her keys a nest of prison shivs, the hot half-life of tears before she's yelling, "Get in the car!" The time inside the time, that silent ride to Trollbrook's hills, Dave and Justin in tricky terror of witness, John his aching crotch, my eye a scabbing fire, the years of failure Mom must have felt in her get out, walk home. The 405 barreling runs we made on junk-ass boards above that valley where the river cracked the air with ice before my brother and I were talking, then laughing about his balls, Mom's sudden anger, Dave and Justin, about why it was we had to break my face. Sorry. All right, so it's another John poem. So my friend, I have a great friend, Meg Day, and she has a series of poems in her book, Last Time at Sea Level, called On Nights When I Am. And it's like she pretends she's someone else, or she takes on a different personality. I have another poem just like that, but this one I sort of took that idea, but it's a little bit different. John, came home one day, my mom has a place in Seabrook, and I came back one day, and John and his buddy were on the deck, and they're fishing. But not on the water, and they weren't fishing down, they were fishing up. They had tied a kite to about 2 miles of fishing line, and they just sent it up. And this is I only have the details that I remember. I didn't fact check with them exactly how it happened. So I imagine what they were actually trying to do. At first, they're probably doing it just to do it and drink some beers and stuff. But I got a little more philosophical about that. I pretended I was in John's head, so that the poem is sort of told through his voice. even though it's completely made up. But it was trying to kind of take a beautiful spin on that idea, what they were doing. Because it was beautiful too. These two guys, good, handsome-looking guys, strong, ball players, muscular, just sitting on top of a deck, just fishing into the sky. It was really cool to see. So I tried to capture that a little bit. When I and my brother, John, fishing with Darren, shirtless, so our chest and shoulders, thick roped from throwing and lifting, with tan in the sun, we, too young to know we would never be this beautiful again, split a 30 of Miller's, a can of Coke on the wobbly upper deck of a beach house in the hot, fat wind of July, and tie a red kite, the cheap and plastic dollar store type, to the line of a spinning reel and let it out and out. Let it climb offshore, gust above fan box cottages, over dune grass, beach, all littoral limits. Let it swim up the sea of sky beyond seerest in sight. And now I string lines to wonder why. To feel the long pull when we reeled it back in, to taste where it had been, to wrestle the muscle of wind, or were we drifting bait for something more, angling angels, back-trolling Gabriels as the deck motored beneath its low octa of clouds? Maybe we clung to a beer, hazy hope to hook some larger leviathan, something big enough to bite and fight and finally break free, so that later on we could brag about all the God that got away. So, a little better. Nobody got hit in the crotch in that one. It's always a good thing. So I'm going to read a few poems from my book. I'm going to start with this poem called 3 Center 2 Electron Bond. I don't know anything about chemistry really, but I saw this term and I had to look it up, and then I thought, this is a cool title for a poem. A 3 center 2 electron bond is an electron deficient chemical bond where 3 atoms share 2 electrons. The combination of 3 atomic orbitals form 3 molecular orbitals, 1 bonding, 1 non-bonding, and 1 anti-bonding. I don't know what it has. I had an idea when I started the poem what it meant, but there's 3 voices in the poem. There's 3 people in the poem. There's a narrator, the narrator's wife, and Bradley Cooper. Not mentioned, but he was on the cover of the Sexiest Man Alive issue of, was that Lifetime magazine, whatever they do, and I was looking at him like, yeah, he's in this. So, 3 center 2 electron bond. I sit down with the sexiest man alive at a cafe in Providence of all places and ask him if he knows this thing about our molecules, that they don't ever stop moving. Even when frozen, inert, they're not inert, not really. He is handsome, no doubt, and blonde enough for today's scruffy chin of clay. You know, though, it's his kindness that kills me, the way he genuinely listens. The devil is what we want of our seraphim, not some beautiful grin, buying our gins, making hard to be okay looks, okay nice, when we settle for love over money. So I asked this guy if the molecules of his smile would be the ones that save the universe. His eyes mist as he says he does not think so, and then he retreats from his Cosmo, returns to his parents' tobacco farm outside of Charlottesville. That's when he starts to call me at night to yell about my pop mythology, the way I rush people into icons. Always he ends by slamming down the phone, then calling back later to say he's sorry. I start to suspect my wife of listening in on the other line, licking up his voice. The sexiest man alive, one night, pulls his skin off in the thickets, brings it to auction with his 10 bushels of bright leaf. My wife begins to travel there monthly and smokes up everything he has, especially his face. And now she is in the movies. You have seen her thighs slipping over the moonlit streets like scissors wiping clean a scene. I guess we never did share more than a snug covalence. I guess my questions should have been for her. I don't know what it means. I'm trying to decide between these 2 poems. Alright, this poem brings Lowell to Exeter a little bit. This is a prose poem. The title comes from Macbeth. I don't know if you know the play, but there's a scene where Macbeth kills Macduff's children and wife, his children especially, and it hurt. He was like, I have to, he's crying. He's destroyed. And the young prince, who's never been to battle, is like, come on, man. You gotta feel it like a man. You gotta take action like a man. And he says, yeah, but I have to feel it like a man first. I have to cry. And then he builds himself up and decides, right, I'm gonna go out and kick Macbeth's ass and stuff. And then the young kid's like, yeah, this tune goes manly, because it's all about, fronting and being a tough guy. And sort of there's a lot of tough guyness in this, or feigning tough guyness, and this idea that like two guys from Lowell ending up I teach down at Phillips Exeter Academy, and I teach English there, and this other guy who I met up with who works in safety, we just randomly met one night outside a kid's room who works there, who was going to school there. And so I'll let the poem talk to itself, or talk to you. This tune goes manly. A witch's tit Tuesday night, and I'm on dorm duty at the boarding school where I teach, coach, and live. If you don't know, then don't ask, but duty in a dorm is about as fun as it sounds. Anyway, there's a fuse blown in some boy's room, and I don't have access to the fuse box closet. This other kid needs an escort to the health center because he's hooked on online gaming and needs to spend a few nights away from the pipe, so to speak. So I call Camp to Safety. They send over an officer, real nice guy, last name Shanahan from his badge. We get the fuse situation settled and head over to the room of the boy, cracked up on Warcraft, and knock at his door. He's packing clothes and books, says he'll be back in a few. Shanahan and I get to talking, and maybe he hears something in my accent because he asks where I grew up. I tell him Lowell. He says he grew up there too. He asks, do I know the Owl Diner? I say, shit, yeah, I'm going there this Sunday with my mom. Since it's been 5 years since my dad died and the brothers are taking her to breakfast. I bring up Donna O'Keefe, who waitresses there, whose boys I played football with. Of course he knows her. Her dad owns the place. And he says he went to Central Catholic, and I tell him I went to Lowell High, and asks me my age. And when I tell him, he asks if I know Shane Norton, who went to MIT, or Steve Matthias, who's now a doctor, and I say, sure, they're pals with my brother. I ask if he knows Mike Sullivan, who went to Central and moved to Southie and got a divorce. Or Chris McGurk, whose coffin I helped carry 14 falls ago after he flipped his white Camaro into a dumpster. We bang on the student's door again, then talk a little more about our kids, our jobs, and funny, ain't it, how we both ended up here in front of this door. Then the conversation sort of turns to sand, gets chalky. Like we don't want to push too far, find out too much. Maybe there's violence between us, some feud unsettled, some lost or stolen girl. Maybe we played each other one Friday night at College Stadium and didn't get payback after a cheap hit on a punt coverage. Maybe one drinking night back in high school, we stood on opposite sides of a fight, maybe with bats, or maybe LeDuc was there and pulled his .22 from the glove box. Maybe instead, we looked straight ahead upon the pale green door of a boarding school student's room, waiting to save the boy from those games that keep him up all night long, waging wars against the avatars of boys he'll never know. All right, how we doing? All right. So I did that, this one, because my mom's here, I'm going to write the record of this one. Not really. So in Meg Day, this poem's after Meg Day stuff. She's on Nights When I Am poems, and I did this poem. My last book, I dealt a lot with my father passing and me dealing with my father passing. This poem is a little more empathetic, or looking at like how another person dealt with that and what my mother sort of went through during that experience, or imagining what it was. I can't possibly know. I can't even come close, but trying to take that leap into that place. And especially when you have a difficult oldest son to contend with. So I thought I might read this poem. And it's sort of supposed to be in her voice. On nights when I am my mother, I have still not drifted to the center of our California king, as I lie awake, wondering if that bellowing belly, those deep brown eyes, that smile could calm the devil, my husband, who died 10 years ago, after his 7 years, slow withering, whether he loved me or just the presence of me. The role of me going to Marshall's to clothe the kids for school, cutting the lawn or having it cut, meeting with teachers, filling the fridge, especially with ice cream for when he'd be home on Sundays, and I'd take the boys to Matthew's church as he'd lay in bed watching Bonanza reruns. I wondered, did I love him? And when I joked to my sons that my first sleepover away from home was my honeymoon, I laugh, but suck back a breath and wonder if that is why I married him. On nights when I am my mother, I can still see him, cigarette thin in the face of my football coach father in the soft, lit, and warm kitchen I grew up in, asking my father for my hand. My father has just said he's not impressed, and the man I will marry says he's not there to impress him. On nights when I am my mother, I hope the boys will bring the kids by, that my oldest will not be so short with me in the same way the man I married was. On nights when I am my mother, I am sorry that I am a fool to my son who does not know what it feels like to every day debride a wound that will not heal in a sucking, sunken stomach. On nights when I am my mother, I wonder if I should have made them help me change their father's dressings, clean the blood, pus, shit, and piss from the sheets. No, I do not want to take that much of their father away from them. No, I am not a fool. They are becoming better fathers than he was, perhaps, but on nights when I'm my mother, I don't like the way they bark sometimes at their wives. On nights when I'm my mother, the broken flesh that is still my husband asks me for more pain medication, and I say yes, and he asks for more, and I give him more, so a little extra oxy drips through his J-tube. On those nights, I remember the way we looked at each other that day he went to the pain management doctor who told him, "I don't even know how you were alive." And for the first time, he wept for the long days of hurt still to come. So when the man I married looks at me, says a little more, I love him, and so I do. And when again paramedics show up to revive him, when our boys arrive, terrified to hold his withered hands when they leave because they have the luxury to leave, when we are alone again in his sleepless moaning nights, and he says more without saying more, I know that he is my husband, that he loves me, knows me enough to know that I will, that I am always more. I'm going to do 2 more poems. Is that right? All right. This is a shorter poem. This is sometimes we read it. It's my friend Sue Repko here writes a lot about gun and gun violence in her essays. Wonderful essays, right here. But this is something that happened. If anybody who's a teacher or has children knows what a lockdown drill is. And that children go through this, and that young children go through it without really knowing why they're going through this. And this, I didn't even think about that. I knew I teach, and I knew I was taking my students through, but they have a sense of why they're doing it. So when this situation happened, I was really just blown out of the water a little bit. This poem's called Child's Play. You hear your son, your first grader, who will help a classmate put on her coat, and not yet be troubled by the teasing of other boys. Who's so afraid of ghosts he needs his sister's jokes so not to quail a Casper, who still labelizes all his R's, who has eyelashes of upswept gossamer. You hear him as he plays with his plastic dinosaurs in the back of your pickup, wail a siren sound over and over. And it is this noise that nudges you from the din of sports radio to ask him what game he is playing. He tells you he's playing Lockdown. Your ribs heave with a sudden breath. Fissures tear across your chest as if ripping out a line of stitches. We practice at school, he says. When you ask him if it's scary, he says, no, but it can be uncomfortable when we all have to crouch in that dark corner. The teacher puts colored paper on the door window, he says. You ask why. So the robber in the hall cannot see inside. All right, one more. This one's slightly longer, but it's happier. It's about love. It's about love. And it's about finding love sort of unexpectedly, maybe, and be willing to look at love where you might not see it coming. Because we have these sort of, categories of who we're supposed to love or not love, and I thought, why is that? And this took a situation that happened to me years ago, and I just like, what if I'd gone a different way? What if that could have been another incredible life? This one's pretty good, but that could have been great too. So it's called Under Blue Blankets. You're straight, right? Says a lean black man in a sub shop on Mass Ave by the Orange Line stop as you fill up a cup with ice and Sprite. Yes, you say, before the question is really set in right, before you've had time to consider other answers, other possibilities. You're 23 from a mill town. You played ball, you like breast and ass, but perhaps there is a wonderful other world to love, to hug, to press lips to lips and linger at the luxury of a kiss. What a waste, he says, and smiles and turns to the door, a bike at his side, a Coke in his long-fingered hand. And was it a waste? Was there a moment you should have walked after him and asked him, why? Why a waste? And maybe you walk a few blocks with him, and maybe you don't go back to work that day, but grabbed a beer at Bukowski's, and maybe you go back to his place, feel a hand slide up your thigh, or maybe you wait a couple days and then go back to his place. Maybe his is a kiss you never knew existed, a kiss that touches a different type of tender. Maybe he shows you the gentle in a man's thick hands, thighs. And maybe you always wanted a hug as hard as your own. And so you talk to your girlfriend, your mom, your dad, your brothers. Years will need to happen until the two of you eat turkey and gravy with them, but it will happen. And the two of you will buy flatware and build shelves in an apartment. And you'll try to write as he gets up to go to work. Children, I don't know. We start that talk but never finish. We drink wine, The Walking Dead is on, and we joke sad and silly about the zombie straight. He will have taught me to love his beard, his stink after a workout. Does he want more? Does he want a nice house in JP? We enjoy cliche. Think it's so kitsch. We laugh at ourselves, but kiss deep after the vows in Cambridge on that wonderful summer Sunday. What will he be doing? A waiter, an architect, a firefighter. Yes, a firefighter, engine 28, and he stays strong and lean, but lets me get fat, filling out forms for fellowships, so I can write the books that no one buys. Why not a novel like the one Cheryl wrote? Now she's on TV, and you're so much cuter than she is. But the way he says it is somehow not as true as it once was. I'm not so cute as those cuddling moments in the bedroom we shared that winter and we couldn't pay for heat. So we rubbed calves together under baby blue blankets, and at baby, as I retell that story, I balk, and he pretends not to notice. I say something about kids again, and he says he wants to go out. Let's go out, we never go out. And I say, you go, I have edits to do. And he does, and comes home late and smells of someone else, but you don't ask because, well, because you should have gone out. You never go out. And the way he lies down with his back to yours hurts. Hurts deeper than anything you've ever known because something has turned. Something cold kicks in the blue blankets, even as he whispers something about adoption before passing out in the musky darkness. In the morning, you go out alone to a diner to get eggs and coffee, and you see the girl you dreamed about one night in college. A dream you did not realize you remembered until you see her. In the dream, she had on a red sweater and black jeans, and here she is, black jeans, red sweater. Her eyes hold yours. You don't drop them like you always do. She will look at you with a smile that crushes you like a stepped-on roach. You talk and joke about things you knew and all the things since. You feel this pulling in your arms, shoulders, desire to touch her cheek, her hair, as if you had done so a million times before, something old and familiar, and you see across her eyes too, for just a second. Then it's gone. You ask if she's still married and maybe she's divorced, but the kids are great and maybe she asks about him and you say, yes. She jokes and says, what a waste. And she'll laugh and you'll laugh too. You exchange numbers but will never call. You go home and he's waiting. I'm sorry, he says. I'm sorry too. And then the clumsy kiss, goofy hug. He makes lunch and you talk. You talk like we haven't talked in years. So, thank you.